Hello Internet, it's time for another Wednesday's Serial. Alright, first up I wanted to talk about something different, because I've heard tons of good things about The Goon forever, and I've never really actually sat down to read it. This one shot came out today, which just seems to be, mocking the industry at large, so who could pass that up? So I thought I'd take a look, but just before I even crack it open, this cover is what sold me on it, and it's just hilarious. I mean, there's tons more of the overt things, but I think one of the funniest things on here is the Band-Aid over the Dark Horse symbol. Just like, they're patching it up. Just, that's awesome. So, yeah. Okay, so as of reading this, the whole thing is just a slap in the face to the big two, and it's really funny. It's a big read, but really the point of this comic is held in a little essay in the back by Eric Powell, the creator, and he's making this point that independent comics aren't selling, and they can never really sell in the market the way it stands now, simply because they're not Marvel or DC, and that comics are being stifled by the companies, the way that the market is held, and that something needs to give, other way comics are just going to kind of die. And he throws out some arguments in a good way, saying that, digital is, has helped some comics, but isn't necessarily changing the whole market. It still is nowhere near the numbers it used to be and could be. And so on. And he has some good points. He's very verbose about it, and good on him. It's awesome. It's entertaining. But what I'm hearing here, and what I've heard a lot, and one thing that I just keep thinking is, there's two markets out there. There's the print / digital pay for, like, Marvel comics sort of thing side, where it's like all these comics, and it's mostly superhero stuff, but it's also some creator-owned books, and there's all that. And then there's like this webcomic side where there's all the sitcom stuff and all this other stuff, and some of these people obviously are trying to break into the main market, of course, but there's also a market in the webcomics themselves that are vastly successful. And in some ways, some even lesser known webcomics right now are more successful than some other ones in the big mainstream area, and they're actually really, like, currently two different markets. And I myself am guilty of this. I mean, I read a few webcomics here and there, but really I read, like, print comics, and I sacrifice reading a lot of webcomics for it. And in fact, I mean, there's a number of webcomics I only bothered to pick up because they were printed. And the biggest of that is Between Gears, which is a weird autobio comic, which, if you're a fan of just, like, comics as an art form and seeing how people do different things with comics, I'd recommend. Beyond that, it's an autobio, so it depends on how you like the idea of a girl telling her story of her senior year in college. If that sounds appealing, check it out. Otherwise, you'll have no interest. But getting back to the Goon, I mean, he's making a lot of good points about, like, how there's a lot of contrivances within the main comics and all that. And he's, heroes need to follow this. And I would say that's kind of true for some comics, and there's a lot of comics that are really poorly done that have some big hook or some big way, and they're just selling. And I've certainly bought a pile of those myself, but I also try to move on by other things. And I think there's small examples, but they're more the exceptions that prove the rule against what he's trying to say, like The Walking Dead or Chew right now. And I don't know, it does feel like, these things are coming to a head. My feeling, though, is that people buying comics right now, print comics, are going to be part of a dying generation that are used to going to the stores, picking up on Wednesday, or getting subscriptions through the mail, or, this old media idea. Whereas going forward, there will always be the print for people who want to actually buy a comic in some form, I'm sure, for some comics, but a lot more is going to be digital, just for ease of access. And eventually I think they're going to find that they can make it cheaper, because I've heard a lot of arguments one way or another, but the honest to God truth is, if you're not printing on paper, you're not printing on ink, you're not transporting the product, you're not having to hold the product, you're not having to store the product, you're not having to charge someone for actually selling the product, or you will, but that's going to be more of a mass job, and so it'll be like a penny off of every product instead of like 20 cents something. 20 cents might even be high now, but you know, drastically less. You'll find a cheaper price point than the $3.99, $3.50, whatever we have now. I think the price of comics will drop slightly, and then they'll eventually want to rise. But part of the thing is people are buying it now, so for it to be cheaper later is very unlikely until some other companies come and change the market, which I feel is inevitable. Yeah. Anyways, we're the last vanguard of this print media, and eventually, once people start digesting comics digitally primarily, the idea of like paying for some comics, then reading some comics online, doing all this, and just the idea of web comics versus these other comics, because you're reading it all on the same device, the walls will disappear, it's going to become less transparent. It's just a story as old as time when it comes to mass media. The way you digest your media eventually will define what that media is and break down some barriers and create new ones. And those new ones, I'm not even going to venture a guess on because I have no ideas. So, yeah. But that aside, this comic is frackin' hilarious, and I think you should read it if you're a modern Comic Day reader, just for the arguments presented, and to maybe take a look at some of the stuff you're reading, and to maybe think about it in a way, and maybe it'll mean a little less to you. But yeah, this comic is an argument against the industry as it stands now, and for that alone, I mean, that makes it a work itself, so check it out. Time for another Dark Horse comic, Pure Media Pandering, Angel and Faith. This wrapped up the Daddy Issues Part 4, the end of the arc, and it was really fun. I mean, the metaphor that they're playing with the demon and what it represents as far as humanity is very on the nose in this, whereas it takes away your suffering, and then within the comic it feeds back, obviously, so they can reset back to normal. But yeah, I don't know, they're playing with a few interesting ideas, and they wrapped up this arc, and Drusilla's back to where she was, but ultimately, I mean, I feel like more happened in the third issue, and then this is just kind of a massive continuity reset, which makes this issue kind of, I don't know, a little lackluster, but still interesting. Kind of curious to see where they're going with it, as with Drusilla babbling crazy, so you get a few ideas, but who knows how that's going to be, you know, the insane prophet tropes. Alright, Army of Darkness 3 is here, and we still have these two diverging stories with the different ashes. And the female one kind of is just being strung in again, it feels, but it's when she's written, she's a much more naturally written character, it feels. But it's also kind of weird because her shirt's torn, so her boobs are just kind of hanging out with the bra, which feels kind of pointless. It's not even cheesecake, so like, why? I don't know. And then you have, you know, male Ash, regular Ash, running around, and I don't know, it feels kind of stilted, but I mean, that's probably all from the character from the movie, and I don't know. But it's finally advancing. I'd be kind of curious to see this all come together. So hopefully this starts playing up and starts paying off a bit more off of whatever. I remember the second issue being a lot better, so maybe it's just one of those things where there's just, it feels there's so much to set up that the payoff's really worth it. And not to say this isn't engaging, but it just doesn't even live up to the last issue. So yeah. So Daredevil 11's out, and it wraps up the Omega effect, and some crazy stuff developing, but when it's all said and done, this seemed like it was going to be more of a Daredevil event, but it feels more like a Punisher event, if nothing else, because the Punisher comics are so devoid of actually having the Punisher and actually seeing him here and interacting actually makes it feel much more like his thing and him owning it, even though in some ways it's weird. Like, you have all these characters, yet they all seem to stand back for each other, and no one really takes the spotlight, and there's a lot focused on Cole, who's Punisher's new ally, I guess. And it's an interesting take to see like the motivations of these characters and how it's all very similar, but how they take on it is actually fairly different. One of my major complaints about it, though, is that Spider-Man's a little too goofy. Like, he's joking all the time despite everything going on, and Spider-Man jokes a lot, but he's not Deadpool. Like, he's kind of cracks some places where it's totally out of character for Spider-Man. Yeah, it's a fun ride, and if you picked up the other two, you're obviously picking up this one. If you didn't pick up this event and you're looking to see if you like some street level Marvel stuff, that's what it would be here for, but I don't think this is a great example of anything. And it certainly isn't the best of Rucka or Wade's writing. I will say, however, the art throughout these 3 issues are some of the best stuff Marvel has to offer. So, Avengers vs. X-Men, or AVX, I guess, whatever. This is the supplementary book, not the main one, and they're taking this as, like, kind of a fight billing. So you have 2 people squaring off, and it's just a fight until they win with random dialogue along the way, because otherwise it'd be really boring. The first one is Iron Man versus Magneto, and of course it doesn't go as obvious as it should. Iron Man's wearing some other suit. He's wearing carbon nanotubes, and if they're nano and carbon, that across the entire suit, I mean, some sort of plastic somewhere in there, I don't know, whatever. Anyways, he throws a lot of absurdly expensive things at Magneto, and then they kind of elevate the battle, but I mean, ultimately, once you take the conceit out of what made this battle pairing interesting, Iron Man's of course going to win, because it's... Honestly, if Captain America, Iron Man, or Thor lost a fight in this thing, I would be shocked, because they're just those characters that they just really can't let lose, right? So it's just... Normally, you know, the fights or whatever, and seeing how the characters react to the morality presented is interesting, but here both characters are written in such a way, and Magneto's written in a way that doesn't fit his character with, like, snide asides and stuff. Normally Magneto's very, you know, business-oriented and whatnot. Might make a little bit of a joke, but not like this. Iron Man makes himself a giant electromagnet, and they allude to the fact that the Phoenix destroys an entire planet. Then it's Thing and Namor, and they fight, and they go they end up in the ocean, and Namor's faced off against the entirety of the Fantastic Four, so he should win. And also, Thing thinks a lot of random comments. They actually use thought bubbles, which is interesting because you don't see those often anymore. But somehow Thing wins through luck of giant fish teeth. And so you have 2 Avengers winning. Way to set up the suspense. Like, just naturally you think they'd have 1-for-1, at least in the first issue, right? You know, give 1 to each side. Which is doubly weird to me, because the way they've set up this whole thing, as I've said before, the Avengers are just in the wrong. Like, no matter how I look at it, I'm like, yeah, the Avengers are doing the wrong thing. I see why they're doing it, kind of, but they still went to a sovereign nation, demanded to incarcerate a minor, and for what they're talking about, that wouldn't even solve the issue. Like, it's just dumb. Alright, new Flash. They're introducing Turbine, which is actually the old character at the top. They do a race switch with a villain, take that for real, but he's actually a sympathetic and interesting character. And it'll be interesting to see how it goes, and they actually set up a way where what Flash does with him isn't necessarily so heroic, but you see the reasoning. It's really interesting to see that, and see how they take, you know, one of the dumbest characters, I mean, the top, ooh, I never got that, and actually do something kind of interesting with it. I don't know if you can really continue with it, but this issue at least was interesting. To even pull that off, I think, is a feat. And then they're flashing into this Grodd. I'm kind of hoping for the amount of building they're doing. When Flash actually gets to Grodd, it's actually going to be an interesting, longer held story, because after the initial story with the Flash, we're getting a lot of like single issues that's actually tying together AB stories, kind of older comic book storytelling, which is more of what they actually promised with the New 52, and I'm kind of happy to see it come around. It's actually made for a much more dynamic comic that's much easier to recommend to people. I'm kind of curious if they're doing with other books that I've just passed by the wayside. So, yeah, but and again, the art in this and the layouts are pretty cool. And doesn't measure up to some of the earlier issues in that respect, just in the layouts. There's no single layout that just blew my mind in this issue, but there's some cool things there too, and the art was definitely strong. And they did some interesting things still, but it didn't have... Every issue so far has had one page that's just blown me away, and this issue didn't have that, and hopefully that will come back. But yeah, still a great read. Alright, New Guardians 8, and what I was afraid of finally happened. I have to make a decision. This book kind of just picks up right where the last issue left off, back where we finally had our first little resolution. They all resolved to do something, and then members of this team just pop off to go do their own thing. Literally, just that. And it all ties into other books that I'm not reading, and so it's literally like, if I'm not buying these books, I'm not getting the story at all. Like, literally, the characters are leaving this book through a portal to go into another book. Like, it's a little too... and they're supposed to keep these books somewhat separate, but because this book is the only one elevating characters outside of the Green Lantern Corps, and I guess the Red Lantern Corps, though, who gives a oh my gosh. So, naturally, they're the ones you want to use when you have to tell a Blue Lantern story. It's just so insane from a corporate storytelling standpoint that now they're ruining the book because the book's doing such a good job. So, as much as I'm enjoying this book, I might have to drop it, or I have to go pick up the Green Lantern books and some Red Lantern books to go figure out what's going on. And honestly, I'll pick up an extra book here or there, for a few months, or if I get hooked, I'll just stay on it. If, it's one or two here or there off of a book I like, but when I already dropped two, and now I'd have to pick them up and come back to it, it's really sad. It seems like the only Green Lantern book that's being self-contained is the Green Lantern Corps book, which I really disliked after a while. And it's just kind of a shame. So maybe it's time to toss this one, and then I'll take recommendations for DC books or independent books to replace it, I guess. Not that I really need replacements. As you all know, I read plenty of comics. But, yeah... Jeez. Ugh. That's annoying. So, there you go. Turtles 9, and the first chunk is coming to a head, and oh my gosh. In the art, you can see the seams a little bit better in this issue in the first few pages, and you can see where they're using marker as opposed to ink in some ways, which kind of clarifies some of the look, and oh my gosh, that's so cool. And so glad I saved this issue for the last of the stack, because it's a nice refreshing breather from some of the other stuff, which wasn't... Oh my god, this is so awesome. This series has been so amazing. It's gotten me to go back and check out all the other Ninja Turtle stuff. I've been rereading original issues. I've gone back to the 2003 animated series to check that out, which is really cool. The downside to all that is it reminds me how much I love all this Ninja Turtle stuff, and I'm kind of getting it mixed up because I'm at the beginning point, which is the part that's retold through all of it, and details are different, and it's kind of interesting to see how the mythology changes. And I'll say this for the Ninja Turtles, whereas there are certain beats that they always hold true for the first chunk of the Ninja Turtles story, it's really just those beats. The way they play it is different, what it means is different, and it's interesting to see the different tones that they use as well. And I know people accuse the 2003 series of being watered down or whatever, but that seems to work well, but nowhere near as well as this. I mean, I love the Turtles, and I have to say, I'm a little more excited for this comic than I was for some other stuff along the way. Certainly that last chunk that Mirage pushed out that was very weird. Man, this is... I know this is corporatized and all that, but damn. So that's it for this week. Like, comment, subscribe, death threats below. Let's just do this. Please, guys, any suggestions, any thoughts what we had on the top about, the state of comics where that is right now? Honestly, if any of you are reading the Ninja Turtles comic and have a critique, I'd love to hear it, because I am blind to it. Completely blind, because I love the Ninja Turtles. I don't care. So, yeah, hit me up, and reviews coming.